something beside me, a light to the kerosene, and the places aren't real anymore, and the faces don't say anything, in the silent light of the mind-blown sphere. It's a game, Devil's Chess Club. Devil's Chess Club.
Welcome to Devil's Chess Club. I'm Aaron Good. Today I'm speaking with the prolific anti-imperialist journalist Kit Klarenberg, who joins us all the way from Belgrade, Serbia. His work explores the role of intelligence services in shaping politics and perceptions. KitKlarenberg.com takes you to his Global Delinquents Substack site, which features the articles that we'll be talking about today. Along with Alex Rubinstein, Kit runs the Active Measures Substack page and YouTube channel. Additionally, Kit Klarenberg is the editor of Grey Zone UK, and he also frequently writes for Mint Press News. Links to these sites are in the show notes. Devil's Chess Club is part of the American Exception podcast. If you want to see this episode in its entirety, and if you want to have access to what I hope to be the most scholarly and useful podcast collection of deep political and historical analysis, please subscribe to the American Exception podcast on Patreon. The URL is patreon.com/American Exception. A link is in the show notes. If you can afford it, please subscribe. With more subscribers, we can do more things. We have a number of items in the works, including film projects and at least one book. We need help to be able to do these things, so if you appreciate this material, please subscribe to the American Exception podcast on Patreon. Kit Klarenberg, it's great to have you back.
Hey, how's it going?
It's pretty good here. The weather's beautiful. I've got the flu, but I'm carrying on. How's everything in Serbia?
Oh yeah, good. I'm soldiering on too, although I don't have the flu yet. Maybe I'll get it via osmosis over the course of this podcast, but hopefully not. I think it's quite an interesting point we've reached in terms of the modern history of the U.S. empire. Never has it been more precarious, but also this is heavily tied up with. We're speaking today on October 7th. This is the first anniversary of Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, which could spell the very end of the Zionist entity, which has been a core component of its maintenance, has been a core component of U.S. strategy and thinking ever since World War II. All to play for is the order of the day, I think.
Yeah, this is it's too insane to follow things day to day. It's really wild to watch history moving in a way, and the atrocities on the side of the West have been huge, and the way that it's covered in the West is bizarre, and yet it seems that the balance of power is really not in the West's favor in both theaters. And I guess you and I have spoken in the past about Ukraine, and it's very strange. You'll hear people online even still today say like it's an unwinnable war for either side. Now they're saying that when they used to say Russia's headed for defeat. Now that it seems like it's basically unlosable, people are saying it's unwinnable for anyone. That's very strange, but I don't even know if we'll get into that today. I want to talk about one of your recent articles at your website, Global Delinquents now, which is it's on Substack, but it's on your own domain, so that's cool.
Yeah, KitKlarenberg.com. Yeah,
that's right. And I'll put a link to that in the show notes. But this article is Collapsing Empire, Iran Throws Down the Gauntlet, and you wrote this just a couple days ago. And you write about the chronology that's led to this current moment where now I guess we're waiting for an Israeli attack. But can you get into what do you think are the most important aspects of of Iran throwing down the gauntlet?
Yeah, well, sure. So, I mean, I think that if we go back to April, okay, I wrote an article for Mint Press, which it got quite a lot of pickup. It was called "Iran Strike Reshapes West Asia Forever." And this was this was following a few weeks prior, Iran carrying out a salvo of drone and missile strikes on Israel. And I made the point that the purpose of this was, from Tehran's perspective, a show of force. They were demonstrating very amply that they could best the Iron Dome, they could beat Israel's air defenses, and if they wished, wreak absolute havoc on Israel if they wished, and if Israel's escalatory activities continued. I think that it's quite clear, and this was this is at the core of my of the investigation you mentioned, is that Iran's refusal or unwillingness to respond dramatically to events such as the assassination of the Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh on Iranian soil, and strikes on diplomatic buildings in Iranian embassies in neighboring countries. This was taken by Israel and its Western backers as an indication that Iran couldn't and wouldn't respond. The October 1st battering has, again demonstrated that this is just complete delusion. And I think that the full scale is still of the damage inflicted by this is still not clear, because Israel is stuck between this rock and a hard place in terms of how to spin this, from, oh, it was awful and this terrible declaration of war on us and absolutely horrendous, to, oh, it was nothing but an expensive fireworks display, because they're trying to downplay the scale of the damage of this, which was absolutely gargantuan. You can see videos online of Iranian missile barrages pounding Israeli airfields into dust. Israel has now added digital clouds to satellite images of its airfields to prevent people from inspecting the full scale of the destruction. And it's quite serendipitously, I came across not long after the strike was finished. I came across this report published by an organization known as JINSA, the Jewish Institute for National Security of America.
They're basically like a Mossad cutout.
Yeah, and they effectively are at while they're little known, they're like rather shadowy and kind of operate on the margins. They are highly influential, and they are behind the ever rising level of Israeli training of US police forces. For instance, I think their core objective is to effectively directly harmonize and if not kind of unify Israel and the US military and intelligence structures. So they are effectively, one and the same. And they have had success in pushing towards this. The report was titled US bases in the Middle East overcoming the tyranny of geography. Now, I thought the report was very interesting because, laying out all of the geographical issues that the US faces from having created this vast network of military installations throughout West Asia to attempt to contain Iran, in reality, they've created a large amount of sitting ducks for Iranian attack, which would not be conducive for quote unquote deterring Iran, which was the entire purpose. And so, like, to give you just to quote from this, he effectively states, that hang on, sorry, let me just find the section. For in a war with Iran, it will be a war of strike aircraft, tankers, and air and missile defense. And here is the problem: these aircraft are largely based at locations along the southern coast of the Arabian Gulf. They are close to Iran, which means they have a short trip to the fight. But Iran is so close that it can take them 5 minutes or less for missiles to hit them, and they're very difficult to defend. They're these kind of bloated, wheezing, often understaffed installations, which with rather inadequate defenses, and often they are like, and as we have seen since the start of the Gaza genocide, there have been a number of strikes, particularly in Iraq, on American military installations, and the empire's only response has been to ask the government very politely to try and stop this. The report amazingly makes this point that an F-35 fighter jet is very hard to hit in the air, but on the ground it's nothing more than a very expensive and vulnerable chunk of metal sitting in the sun.
This reminds me of back in the Cold War era. Khrushchev used to look at West Berlin, and he would describe it as like Washington's testicles, right? He would say like they're so vulnerable, I squeeze them if I am angry or whatever. And like that, the US thinks that they have so ingeniously put these lily pads out there in Iraq and Syria and so on, and then all around Iran. But as you say, could be taken out pretty quickly. And also Yemen is right. We're not quite certain of the capabilities Yemen might have as well to join in that, if it were to come to that.
Yeah.
So,
well, I was going to say that, like, I mean, I have been following the war in the Red Sea very like a hawk, because I think it's it throws up all sorts of issues which the mainstream doesn't want to go near. And it's I a few months back wrote a column for Al Mayadeen, which as we speak is currently offline due to a massive cyber attack. I wonder who's responsible. The column was titled Yemen defeats US Navy. In the months since, several mainstream publications in Britain, including Unheard and the Daily Telegraph, have published almost identical headlines. So I'm evidently rather a trendsetter in certain quarters. But yeah, I just made the point that Operation Prosperity Guardian, which was this effort to unblock the Red Sea, because Ansarallah, also derisively known as the Houthis, the Yemeni resistance group, they stated that they would not allow the ships of any associated with any country that was supporting or carrying out the genocide in Gaza to pass through the Red Sea, and they impounded a large number of vessels. They sunk a number of ships. So with much fanfare, the US launched this multi-country naval flotilla called Operation Prosperity Guardian. And there were a large number of commentators who thought that Yemen was going to get absolutely decimated by this. And there are all of these rather grand images of like the USS Eisenhower slicing through the oceans in order to get to the Red Sea and bop the Ansarallah. I knew that actually this was probably going to be like another Suez moment, for the US empire, and that has been validated. There are insinuations that USS Eisenhower was hit by Ansarallah. There were all sorts of gripes and groans from US military commanders that they were wasting hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars on missiles to shoot down drones costing a few, $20 or $30 flown by Ansarallah. And yeah, this kind of came to an end without much fanfare over the summer, without having achieved literally anything. None of the objectives that it sought, the blockade continues and may enlarge, and it was explicitly stated by US officials that they wanted to deter Iran from striking Israel. This is now twice that it failed to do. The presence of US aircraft carriers in the region have failed to do so. this was meant to make Hezbollah back off from its slowly grinding down the Zionist entity. It's achieved none of this, and it's, to the extent that it's been reported at all, it's kind of been quietly acknowledged that it was a total failure, and it's kind of, they're sweeping it under the rug a bit. There was this, I think it was in June, there was this astonishing Associated Press article which had had interviews with returning US pilots where they who had just been in the Red Sea, and they were saying, like, well, the experience is very traumatizing because we're not used to getting shot at. Like the US military, for all of its for all of the hype and the PR and the spin, it is a bloated, wheezing relic of a time when all the US's or the Empire's enemies were defenseless, and the US could carry out one-sided gang beatings of adversaries who can't fight back. The resistance has shown that it is willing and able to fight back, and there is little sign of the US acknowledging or US officials kind of getting to grips with this. Now, I think that, just to go back to that Ginza report, there was this astonishing excerpt in it. Bear in mind, this was published in mid-September, right? So this was written by General Frank McKenzie, who was the former head of CENTCOM, the US Central Command.
By the way, it's great. Sorry. It's great that they can find employment at an Assad cutout after leaving the U.S. military.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a revolving door, but in effect, he oversaw the disastrous retreat from Afghanistan in August 2021. He talks in the report about how repeatedly states that the April strike by Iran on Israel was a total failure, and he keeps using this language, and he states that Tel Aviv's powerful, proven air and missile defense capability, along with US and allied assistance, repelled Iran's attack. Like I said, it was never intended to cause mass casualties. It was never intended to cause mass destruction. They were just showing that they could do this if Israel didn't stop messing around and engaging in provocative.
They gave a very generous warning in the lead up to it that, hey, we're going to attack, and this is where we're going to attack.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a well advertised show of force, capability, and potential. And then it wasn't this decapitation, and there were all of these astonishing images of these Iranian missiles like soaring over the Knesset, which is Israel's parliament. Now, elsewhere, Mackenzie repeatedly talks about how Israel and its allies repelling this alleged attempted decapitation strike by Iran, which was in every measurable way a remarkable success story. I might add that the Pentagon officials explicitly stated they were even better prepared for when Iran struck next time, and we've just seen on October 1st that this was just total fantasy. Just completely false. But elsewhere in this Ginza document, Mackenzie talks about how he states events of the past 2 months clearly show that Iran can be deterred from undertaking irresponsible and deadly attacks in the region. And so what he means by this is, that, as I said, he clearly thought that the lack of completely incendiary escalation from Iran in response to all of these provocations, and then the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah. They genuinely thought that no response was forthcoming because they had successfully intimidated Iran into not doing anything, and the answer was just to keep doing this and keep engaging in escalations and provocations because Iran couldn't and wouldn't do anything in response. I mean, this has not aged well. All of 2 or 3 weeks later, and I think that something that really stuck out to me was that a lot of Zionists online, clearly trained Hasbara operatives were making claims like, well, oh, Iran didn't kill any civilians, so the attack was a failure. And it's like, well, I think that's quite actually kind of inadvertently revealing of how they gauge military success. But it's like, yeah, they can't admit that, as I said, they're in this strange position now where they can't admit that it was absolutely devastating. And you've got to bear in mind that, I mean, I as someone who's been writing about and campaigning for Palestine for like half of my lifetime since I was a teenager. You know, I remember all of the PR and the publicity around the Iron Dome and how Israel was trying to export this because it was impregnable. And, you know, fast forward to today, and there you can find dash cam videos of like Israelis driving down the motorway, and then some sentry post gets like just wiped out, like as they're driving past it with like pinpoint precision. Like there was no air defense. And I think that I mean, yes, as you mentioned, there's a lot of talk from the Zionists and their supporters about how Israel is going to, lash back, and that this is going to be the end of the Islamic Republic. Benny Gantz, who was this probably one of Israel's most dangerous leaders, had boasted that Tel Aviv had the capabilities to strike, to just destroy Iran, and this will now be put into action. There have been lots of talks of serious consequences. In terms of how and whether they can respond, I'm not actually sure that they can do very much. And we're seeing, the attempted invasion of Lebanon, which, I mean, that's creating a lot of chaos, but it's been hugely costly for the invaders. That even the mainstream media has reported on Israel's losses, which they are very keen to conceal. Hezbollah has delivered a series of very damaging blows to the invading forces. That's not to say that Israel hasn't killed innocent Lebanese civilians in large numbers and inflicted a large amount of damage itself. But I mean, bearing in mind that we have been consistently told that Israel will have full US support for whatever it does, and the US won't be able to prevent all-out war erupting between Israel and Lebanon and Israel and Iran, and the US will assist whatever Netanyahu chooses to do. I mean, what support can be given at this time beyond just like an endless flow of bunker buster bombs to kill children? I don't think that they actually have the muscle to assist, let alone equip Israel to take out Hezbollah, let alone the Iranians, who've been very patiently waiting and constructing the circumstances of the Zionist entity's demise for decades.
Yeah, I don't think that even the U.S. I mean, the advantage that the U.S. and Israel have is just air power and nukes. I mean, they don't. Yeah. If they get onto the ground, I don't even think a U.S. invasion into Lebanon would work out, even if the U.S. decided they wanted to do something so stupid. Because it seems that, I mean, unless you just destroy everything, but that would just demand. I don't. It doesn't seem that there's any logic to what they're doing unless they're wanting to start a nuclear war. But
yeah, well, I mean, I don't think that there is much logic at this stage, like particularly beyond fantasies of. I mean, and I think that we shouldn't underestimate the role of Britain in this. Britain has, for many years, been infiltrating Lebanese military and security agencies. I've written about this for The Cradle, which is a great website and well worth your readers' time. Your viewers' time. I have based on a bunch of leaked documents. Like, I mean, it's quite remarkable that there are like British officials and operatives within Lebanon's foreign and domestic spying agencies and British technology as well. And they're keeping a very close eye on Hezbollah, which is prescribed as a terrorist organization in the UK. There were at the end of last year there were leaks in local media of the British government was seeking permission from the Lebanese government for the British army to be able to move around wherever they wished in Lebanese territory, and with their weapons drawn. And they also wanted immunity from prosecution or arrest for any crime for British soldiers. Why might they want lots of British soldiers with their guns roaming around Lebanon? Very strange. But there was another thing that really stuck out in my mind as well, and it's something I've mentioned in my writing quite frequently. On October the 8th, 2023, this is about just over 24 hours after Al-Aqsa flood commenced, there was this veteran British client journalist called Robert Peston, who is a mouthpiece for British state power. He took to X or Twitter to announce that British intelligence sources had told him that Hamas attack on Israel had the potential to be as destabilizing to global security as the war in Ukraine, and there was a risk of this crisis spreading well beyond the Middle East, and we could be in the early stages of a conflict with ramifications for much of the world. How did they know on October 8th, when there was just chaos, it was ascendant, nobody really knew what was going on, the Israeli government hadn't given any indication of what their response was going to be at that stage? I mean, unless the British intended and planned to cause a conflict with ramifications for much of the world. And I think that, I mean, you mentioned Ukraine, and I think we've discussed before, the war in Ukraine is basically a product of British intelligence. The people who were pushing for war with Russia and lobbying the US to get on side with this were British intelligence operatives, and who were heavily embedded with the post-Maidan nationalist government, and are now driving Britain's proxy war strategy of endless escalation in Ukraine. And these people, in leaked emails the Grey Zone has reported on, talk about the need to counter US hesitancy and reluctance. The recent Kursk incursion, which has ended in a total disaster for the almost vanquished Ukrainian forces, they expended most of their best soldiers and best equipment on a completely pointless incursion into Kursk. Although, was it pointless from the British government's perspective? Because, as I again have reported on my website, there was a report in the London Times which stated that the Kursk very prominently featured British-made Challenger 2 tanks in promotional videos that were passed to and there were British government sources briefing openly news outlets that, this is the first time that British tanks have been on Russian soil since like World War II and all this other stuff. And the Times revealed that this was part of a deliberate strategy by Keir Starmer to try and get other countries more overtly involved in the proxy war, and kind of openly admit what's been very clear all along, which is yes, that they are they are effectively sustaining this, and the Ukrainians are fighting their war on Russia for them, and losing very badly now, it seems. But it's like, I think that it's the same in Lebanon and West Asia. Britain sees any US quote unquote withdrawal from the region as damaging to its own power. And so I think that yes, Britain is quite keen to cause a major conflict in the region. Because they see it as the empire being on the line. And since 1945, British strategy has been to maintain the American empire for its own purposes and steer it in directions that benefit it. I mean, we see this in my neck of the woods in the Balkans, where there are numerous British officials, such as Alicia Kearns, who's like a former MI6 operative, who's like making fiery speeches every day about Serbia and the threat posed to its that Serbia poses to its neighbours. There's been a lot of British meddling in this region in recent years, and the US, it's a part of the world the US seems to have largely lost interest in, and the British are extremely unhappy about that.
You can watch the rest of this episode by subscribing to the American Exception podcast on Patreon. There you will find the best coverage and analysis of the deep politics of the U.S. empire. The URL is patreon.com/American Exception. It's also in the show notes. If you can afford it, please subscribe. Either way, as far as this YouTube video goes, please like, share, and subscribe.